Tell me something. If the person you spent 3 years mourning, the one whose absence had quietly hollowed out every ordinary day, was suddenly standing 40 feet away from you, laughing in the afternoon sun, completely at ease, while you could barely get through a regular Wednesday without feeling the weight of her gone, what would you do? Welcome to Dad's Pure Emotions. Get comfortable, pour yourself something warm, and understand before we go any further that the people in this story had choices. They made them. Some of those choices were made out of love, some out of fear, and one of them changed everything I thought I knew about the woman I married. Let me put you in the picture. Florence, Italy, late May. The kind of evening where the light coming off the old stone buildings turns everything amber and still, and even the most ordinary street feels like it belongs in a different century. I was there for a professional conference. I'm a civil engineer, bridges, foundations, load-bearing structures. My idea of sightseeing is looking at a Renaissance archway and thinking about the compressive force distribution. My colleague and closest friend, a man named Phil, found this endlessly amusing and completely unacceptable. I had every intention that evening of staying in my hotel room. Room service, something forgettable on television, asleep by 9. I was 53 years old and emotionally worn in a way that 8 years of living alone will do to a person, and the thought of going out held absolutely no appeal. Phil knocked on my door at 8:30. He already had his jacket on. He had already made the decision for both of us. "Martin," he said, "you have been to Florence twice, and you have never once sat at an outdoor table and just existed in this city. That is genuinely a waste." "Phil, I'm tired," I said. "You have been tired for 8 years," he said. "The piazza is 3 blocks away. Get your jacket." That is how I ended up at a small outdoor restaurant on the Via dei Servi, with a glass of wine I hadn't ordered and a front row seat to the moment. My entire understanding of my own life came apart at the seams. But before I get to that evening, I need to tell you about Nora. Her full name was Nora Jean Whitfield, and she had a laugh that was completely unsuitable for enclosed spaces and absolutely impossible not to love. We met at a mutual friend's cookout in Indianapolis when I was 38. She knocked a full cup of lemonade off the picnic table onto my shoes, looked at me with total composure and said, "Those needed cleaning anyway." I asked for her phone number before the afternoon was over. We were married 13 months later. She was sharp and warm and occasionally infuriating in the specific way that means someone knows you too well. She had strong opinions about bad architecture, weak coffee, and people who didn't say what they meant. I loved her the way you love something that becomes so much a part of your daily life that you can't fully picture the shape of yourself without it. 8 years ago, Nora went on a trip with 2 of her closest friends, a cruise along the Adriatic coast. I drove her to the airport, helped load her luggage, and stood at the departure entrance pretending I wasn't going to miss her at a level that was probably embarrassing for a grown man. She kissed me, told me not to eat sandwiches for dinner 3 nights in a row, and walked through the glass doors pulling her small green carry-on bag. 4 days later, my phone rang. There had been an accident on the ship, a late-night deck, a railing, 2 witnesses. They recovered her personal belongings, including the watch I'd given her on our 2nd anniversary, the one with her initials on the back. They did not recover her body. The currents in that section of the Adriatic, I was told, made full recovery unlikely. I planned a funeral without a casket. I stood in front of the people who had loved her, in a suit that felt wrong on my body, and spoke about Nora in the past tense. Her mother, a woman named Dorothy, sat in the front row and held my hand through the entire service and wept with the kind of grief that seems to come from somewhere deeper than the chest. 8 years. I went to grief counseling. I sold the house we'd shared. I put myself into work the way people put themselves into work when there is nothing else to fill the space. I learned, slowly and with considerable difficulty, how to be a functioning person again. And then Phil made me leave the hotel room. So there I was. Outdoor table, wine glass in hand, Phil in the middle of telling a story about something that had happened at baggage claim that afternoon, and I was half listening, half watching a street performer near the Fountain Butcher something by Dean Martin, when something at the edge of my vision made me stop. Not slow down, stop. Across the street, outside a small shop that sold pastries and coffee, there was a woman. She was laughing at something the man beside her had just said, a full, genuine laugh, head tilted slightly back. She had dark hair, the particular shade that picks up warmth from light the way Nora's did, brown with just a suggestion of something richer underneath. She was wearing a pale blue dress. One hand rested on the shoulder of a small girl, 4 years old, maybe 5. Standing beside the girl was what appeared to be her identical twin. My brain did what brains do. It cataloged the image, filed it under coincidence, and tried to keep moving. My eyes did not cooperate. "Phil," I said, keeping my voice level. Without being obvious about it, look across the street, the woman in the blue dress. Phil turned his head with the subtlety of a man who has never once in his life been subtle and looked directly at her. He turned back to me, and I watched the easy expression on his face go somewhere else entirely. He didn't say anything. Phil always has something to say. His silence was more alarming than anything he could have spoken. "Say something," I said. "Martin," that was all he said, just my name. "I know what I'm looking at," I said. "Tell me what you see." He looked again, longer this time. Careful. Then he set his glass down and said quietly, "She could just be someone who resembles her. People can look remarkably alike. It doesn't have to mean." "Nora had a birthmark," I said, "just below her right ear, small, curved. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd been close to her." Phil looked across the street one more time. The woman tilted her head toward the man beside her to say something, and as she did, the evening light caught the right side of her neck. "Just below her ear, small, curved." I set my wine glass down very carefully. Now I want to be clear about what I did not do in that moment. I did not stand up. I did not call across the street. I did not have any kind of scene in the middle of a Florentine piazza. I am an engineer. I have spent 30 years approaching problems the same way, calmly, systematically, without letting emotion get ahead of evidence. I turned to Phil and said, "I need you to take a photograph right now without her noticing." He looked at me the way he looks at me when he thinks I'm about to do something he'll regret on my behalf. But something in my face must have communicated that this was not negotiable, because he picked up his phone, and with hands that were not entirely steady, he took the photo. That one imperfect, slightly blurred photograph became the first thread, and when I pulled it, everything came with it. Let me tell you something about engineers. We are, as a professional category, not given to dramatic conclusions. We don't look at an incomplete data set and announce a verdict. We look at what we have, we identify what we're missing, and we keep working until the picture is complete enough to trust. So when I tell you that I sat on the edge of my hotel bed that night until well past 2 in the morning, going back and forth between absolute certainty and the reasonable suspicion that I'd spent 8 years grieving, and it had finally caught up with my mind, I want you to understand that was not me being emotional. That was me doing the only thing I know how to do, trying to get to the truth. Phil knocked on my door at 7 the next morning with 2 coffees and the same clothes he'd been wearing the night before. He sat down in the chair by the window, handed me a cup and said, "All right, walk me through it." "Walk me through what?" "Whatever is happening in your head, you've got to look." "What look?" "The one you had during the Bridgeport project when you figured out there was a drainage problem 2 years before the inspection report caught it. The look that means you've already decided something and you're just building the case." I almost smiled at that. I put his phone on the table between us. We both looked at the photograph. A woman in a blue dress slightly out of focus, laughing. A man beside her, 2 small girls. "Her hair," I said. "Her build, The way she was standing. Phil, I could see her laugh from across that street, and I knew what it was before I heard it. And that birthmark, same shape, same location. Phil was quiet for a while. Then he said carefully, "So what are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything yet. I'm saying I need to find her again." He rubbed his face with both hands, his tell for when he's already resigned to something. He said, "Of course you do. The coffee shop, the pastry place across the street. People go back to places they like. We go back tomorrow morning." He looked at me for a long moment. Then, "Fine. But if this turns out to be a complete stranger who just happens to look like Nora, you are taking me somewhere with a beach and no historical monuments." "Agreed." "Agreed," I said. We returned to that street the next morning, and the morning after that. By the third day, I was acutely aware of how this looked: two middle-aged men nursing unnecessary coffees at the same outdoor table, watching a pastry shop with studied casualness. Phil had stopped complaining, which I took as a sign of genuine concern rather than acceptance. Then, on the afternoon of the third day, she came out of a building 5 doors down from the coffee shop. No children this time. No man beside her. Just her, alone, a canvas bag over one shoulder, sunglasses pushed up on her head, walking with that particular ease of someone who has lived in a place long enough to move through it without thinking. Phil saw her the same instant I did. I was already standing. He caught my arm. "What's the plan, Martin?" "I'm going to walk past her, close enough to see her face clearly. And then I'll know." "That is not a plan," he said, but he let go of my arm. I crossed the street. "I want to be honest with you about what was happening inside me during those 20 or 30 steps. 8 years of learning to live without someone. 8 years of therapy and silence and slow, difficult reconstruction. And with every step I took toward this woman, it felt like walking through something that had set, like the ground itself was resisting." She was looking into her bag for something. I slowed my pace. She was 10 feet away, then 8. She looked up. And I stopped. Every feature I had spent years trying to stop seeing in my sleep. The particular angle of her nose. The way one eyebrow sat slightly higher than the other. The set of her mouth, always just at the edge of something. A smile or a thought or a sentence that was going to land exactly right. But here is what cracked something open in me. Standing on that street in Florence with the afternoon sun on the old stone buildings. She looked at me the way you look at someone you've never seen before. Not with alarm, not with recognition, not with the expression of a woman confronted by something she'd been hopping to avoid for 8 years. She looked at me with the mild, passing attention you give a stranger who has stepped slightly into your path. She said, and I remember the exact sound of it, "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I blocking you?" American accent, Midwestern, my stomach dropped. "No," I said, and I have no idea how my voice came out even. "No, not at all, my mistake." She smiled that particular smile, and kept walking. I stood on that sidewalk and did not move for a considerable amount of time. When I got back to Phil, he looked at my face and said, "It's her, isn't it?" I sat down, picked up my coffee, took a sip even though it had gone cold. "She didn't know me," I said. "What?" She looked directly at me, Phil. A full, clear look, nothing. She asked me if she was in my way. He stared at me. Then carefully, "Martin, is it possible this is just someone is it possible she only looks like Nora? The voice, too. Same pitch, same accent, same rhythm when she speaks." We sat with that for a long moment. Then I said the thing that had been building in the back of my mind for 3 days. The thought I'd been constructing the way you construct anything, from the foundation up, one verified piece at a time. "Phil, what if Nora never told me she had a sister?" He blinked. "A sister? An identical twin? What if Nora had a twin sister that no one in her life, no one in my life, ever knew about?" Phil opened his mouth, closed it, Opened it again. Martin, how do you keep a twin sister from your own husband for years? The same way you keep anything, I said, very carefully and for a very serious reason. I took out my phone. I scrolled to a name I hadn't called in over 3 years. Dorothy, Nora's mother. Phil saw the name on the screen and his expression shifted. You're calling her right now, from Italy. If I'm wrong, I said, she's a grieving mother getting a strange question. I know what she's already lost. So do I. He went quiet. I pressed call. 4 rings. Then a voice, older than I remembered, slower but unmistakable. The voice of a woman who had aged in the particular way that sustained sorrow ages people. Hello. Dorothy, I said, it's Martin. 3 seconds of silence. And in those 3 seconds, I heard something that told me more than any answer could have. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't the warm, relieved sound of a woman reconnecting with someone she'd once loved like a son. It wasn't grief resurfacing unexpectedly. It was fear, quiet, controlled, and completely unmistakable. Martin, she said, my goodness, where are you calling from? Dorothy, I need to ask you something directly. I need you to be honest with me. Of course, she said. What is it, sweetheart? Did Nora have a sister? Silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty. The kind that is absolutely full of something being held back. What, Martin, what kind of? Dorothy. A shorter silence, and then barely above a whisper, who have you been talking to? Not, of course not. Not, what on earth are you talking about? Not a laugh, not a dismissal. Who have you been talking to? I looked at Phil across the table. His face had gone pale. Nobody, I said, but I think you and I need to have a very long conversation. The line went dead. I stood there on a Florence street with a dial tone in my ear, and in that moment I understood something with complete clarity. Nora's death wasn't the secret I'd been orbiting for 8 years. Nora's life was. Here is something nobody tells you about the kind of discovery that rearranges everything. It doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't strike you clean and complete the way lightning does. It comes in the way that water damage comes gradually, quietly, and by the time the full picture is visible, the walls have already been changed by it. Dorothy hanging up told me more than any answer she could have given. I sat with the silence for a few seconds. Then I booked a flight home. Phil looked at me across the table. We still have 2 days left on the conference. I know. You're going anyway. Dorothy didn't deny it, Phil. She didn't laugh. She didn't say I was imagining things. She asked who I'd been talking to. That is not a grieving mother reacting to a strange question. That is a woman who has been waiting 8 years for a specific phone call and is frightened because it finally arrived. Phil was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his own phone and changed his flight. You don't have to come, I said. Martin, he said, after Nora died, you ate cereal for dinner for 2 straight weeks. You are not doing this alone. Go pack. I don't say this often enough. Phil is the best person I know. Dorothy lived in a small town in central Ohio, a modest house on a quiet street that I had visited more times than I could count during my marriage, and a handful of times in the fog of the years that followed. The kind of house that always smelled of something baking and had more framed photographs on the walls than wall space could comfortably hold. I had always felt at ease there. I did not feel at ease when I knocked on that door. She answered after a pause that was just long enough to tell me she had looked through the peephole and made a decision. She was smaller than I remembered, grayer, and carrying herself with the careful posture of someone who has been holding something heavy for so long the weight has become permanent. Martin, she said. Dorothy, can I come in? She stepped back without another word. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had once watched football with her late husband, where Nora and I had announced our engagement with a bottle of champagne and tremendous nervous energy, where I had sat after the funeral eating food I couldn't taste and accepting condolences I couldn't fully hear. Dorothy folded her hands in her lap and looked at me the way a person looks at something they have been dreading. I didn't take time finding the words. "I saw her in Florence," I said. "I was 10 feet away from her. She spoke to me. She didn't know my face, which means either there is something seriously wrong with her memory or she is not Nora. So I need you to tell me the truth." The silence stretched long enough that I thought she might simply refuse to speak at all. Then she exhaled fully, completely, the way a person exhales when they have been holding a breath for 8 years, and she said, "Her name is Lena." I sat with that for a moment. Lena, one letter different from Nora. One single letter, separating 2 lives that had apparently existed in parallel for decades without me ever knowing the second one was there. "Nora had an identical twin named Lena," I said. Dorothy nodded. "And in over 5 years together, 14 months of dating and 4 years of marriage, she never told me." "She never told anyone, Martin. That was the agreement." "What agreement? What does that mean?" Dorothy looked at her hands for a long moment. Then she began. "When the girls were 8 years old, their father and I separated. It was not a peaceful situation. He was not a man who accepted being left. There were people connected to him, people I don't need to name, who made it very clear that if he couldn't have his family, he would find ways to take things from us that we couldn't get back." The room had gone very still. "We had to disappear," she said. "Both girls, different paths. It was the only way I could be certain both of them were safe. Nora stayed with me. Lena went to live with my sister in the Pacific Northwest. We agreed no contact between them, no connection of any kind, because any connection was a thread, and if someone found one thread, they could follow it to both of them." I looked at her. "You separated your twin daughters," I said. "I separated my twin daughters to keep them alive," she said. "There is a difference, and I have lived with that difference every day since." I sat back and let that settle. And as it settled, everything I thought I knew about Nora began to quietly rearrange itself. Every time she'd been vague about her childhood, every time I'd raised the subject of family and she'd moved the conversation somewhere else, every time I'd assumed she was still carrying grief over her father, a man she'd told me had simply left one day and never returned. She hadn't been grieving an absent father. She had been protecting a secret that was keeping her sister alive. "The cruise," I said, "the accident." Dorothy's jaw tightened. "Was it real?" She looked at me then, and what I saw in her face stopped me completely. It was grief. Not performed, not managed, the specific, bone-deep grief of a mother who lost her child. The kind you cannot manufacture and cannot mistake. "Yes," she said. "Nora died, Martin. My daughter died." I need to tell you what happened inside me in that moment, because it matters. My chest did something complicated and difficult and necessary. Because what I'd been carrying for 3 days, the low, terrible suspicion that perhaps our entire life together had been some kind of constructed deception, lifted. Nora was real. What we had was real. Her death was real. "Then who is in Florence?" I said. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "After the accident, after Nora actually died, I made a decision. Lena didn't know Nora existed. Nora didn't know Lena existed, but I knew both of them. I had kept Lena's contact through my sister all those years, and after I lost Nora, I reached out. For the first time, I told Lena that she had a twin sister, and that the twin sister was already gone." I sat with that image for a long moment, the weight of it. "How did she take it?" I said. Dorothy almost smiled, sad and small but real. "How would you?" she said. "Finding out you had a sister you never knew and that she was already gone before you ever had the chance." I had no answer for that. "Lena is a good woman," Dorothy said. "She made a life for herself in Europe. She married a man named Robert. They have twin daughters." She paused. I'm aware of the particular irony in that. I leaned forward. Dorothy, does Lena know about me? There was a beat, just a half-second before she answered. Dorothy. She knows Nora was married. She knows your name. She has seen photographs. Something cold moved through me. I thought about the street in Florence. The way Lena had looked at me, clear-eyed, unhurried, completely untroubled. She didn't react when she saw me, I said. If she's seen photographs, and she wasn't expecting to see the husband of the twin sister she never met standing right in front of her on a street in Florence. She wouldn't have been looking for you, Dorothy said quietly. She would have had no reason to. I pressed my fingers to my forehead and sat with everything I had just been handed. Here is what I was processing. Nora was real. Our love was real. Her death was real. There had been no deception aimed at me, no calculated betrayal, no constructed life. There was only a woman who had carried a secret from the time she was a child, a secret that had not been born from selfishness but from survival, a secret that had kept another person breathing. And somewhere in Florence, there was a woman who carried Nora's face, Nora's voice, Nora's laugh, living a life that Nora never got the chance to finish. I want to meet her, I said. Dorothy looked at me for a long time. Victor, she caught herself, old habit. Martin, she is the only living piece of Nora that exists in this world. And she doesn't know who Nora was. Not really. She doesn't know how Nora laughed. She doesn't know what she was afraid of, or what she was like on an ordinary Sunday morning, or what she talked about on the drive to the airport the day she left. My voice did something on that last part that I hadn't prepared for. Dorothy was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I'll reach out to her. I can't make you any promises, but I'll reach out. 3 weeks later, a message came from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "This is Lena. My mother explained what happened in Florence. I've been thinking about it since she called. I think I'd like to talk if you're willing. I have many questions about my sister. I imagine you might have a few as well." I read it 4 times. Then I called Phil. He picked up on the second ring. "Tell me something good," he said. "She reached out," I said. "Lena." A pause. "How do you feel?" I thought about that honestly, without the weight of suspicion or shock pressing on everything. "Like I get to tell someone about Nora," I said. "Someone who never knew her, someone who deserved to." Phil was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Then call her back, Martin." I did. That conversation went 4 hours. We talked about Nora, what she was like, how she moved through a room, the things that made her laugh, the things she couldn't stand, the life she had built and the person she had been. I described photographs. I told stories. Lena asked questions with the careful attention of someone taking an inventory of something precious. And somewhere past the 2-hour mark, in the middle of a story I was telling about something ridiculous that had happened on our first real vacation together, Lena laughed. I recognized it before it finished. I am a civil engineer from Indianapolis. I do not, as a rule, cry. But Phil has a version of events from a phone call that evening that I am neither confirming nor denying. The woman I had lost did not come back. What came back was something different, something that had always been missing, that even Nora herself had never known was gone. The half of her that had been quietly kept apart all those years, finally, gently, found. If this story reached something in you, please take a moment to like it and subscribe. At Dad's Pure Emotions, we tell stories that are real and human and rooted in the things that matter most. Thank you for being here with us.